So come on, man, get on through, jerk. Mostly everybody knows that street photography is probably the hardest genre to participate in, basically because of the lack of control you have in what you could photograph on any given day. However, there are a lot of great cameras out there to make this sport a little bit easier, like the Fuji X100V, the Ricoh GR3. But what if you want to do it on film? And I know film is scary because you can't review any of the stuff that you photograph, and you're basically forfeiting even more control over a genre that you hardly have any to begin with. But don't worry, because I'm going to be sharing all the settings that I use for my film street photography, and you're going to realize it's actually a lot easier than you think. Okay, so for film stocks, I typically stick with ISO 400 or 800 films, and I overexpose both of them by one stop to preserve the shadows in my images. So the way that I overexpose my film is by changing my ISO dial to one stop below the film stock that's in the camera. So if I'm loading a Portra 800, I would change my light meter setting to ISO 400. So it will essentially trick the light meter into giving me a setting that'll ultimately overexpose my film by one stop. But if I do use ISO 200 film, I typically don't overexpose it. I shoot it at box speed so I can preserve the camera settings I need, which I'll cover in the next tips. So if you ever catch yourself in these like in and out lighting situations, these high contrast situations, like I'm about to dip into the shadow right here, then dip right back out into the light. When in doubt, overexpose. Film can take so much overexposure, it's no problem at all. Film will always take care of you. If you rock with like those Kodak films or any Fuji film, overexpose by +5 stops and you'll still be fine. Those highlights will be fine, but you want to get those shadows perfectly exposed, because if you can't get those details and they're crushed, in post you can't recover anything. You want every beautiful shot that you make out here in the wild to be nice and exposed. Alright, so let's talk about the lenses that I use. I typically switch back and forth between a 28mm and a 35mm, mostly because these are wide enough lenses to capture enough context around my subject and to have a deep enough depth of field when I'm shooting at f5.6 or f8, because I want to use this technique called zone focusing. And if you don't know what zone focusing is, I made a whole entire video about it, and you could click on the tab right here to watch it. I highly recommend it. It's very informative. But to easily sum up when I use each focal length, I typically use 28mm when the space I am in is very crowded with people and they probably don't care that I'm taking photos. If the space is not as crowded and people are a lot more aware of my presence and are probably cautious around me, I shoot with a 35mm because I have a little bit more reach to kind of photograph them without being too far away and having them be too small in the photo, but I still get that nice context, depth of field like look. But lately I have been using a 21mm and it's been kind of fun to get close to my subjects with that, but I'll make a separate video about that because I think it's a more extensive topic. But now that we know the film and ISO that we're going to be working with along with the lenses and focal length, let's talk about the actual settings that I use in broad daylight, cloudy, shady, whatever setting. But just to get out of the way, if you want to photograph at night, you're kind of screwed unless you have a flash. With ISO 800 film, I use 1/1000th of a shutter speed at f8. In the shade, I use 1/250th of a shutter speed at f5.6. In cloudy and golden hour, I use 1/1000th at 5.6. And if you're not a physics head, we do get less light at golden hour, even if your subject is being blasted by that nice old sunset fire. We're just not getting the whole spectrum of the light, but anywho, that's what it is. With ISO 400 film, I use 1/1000th of a shutter speed at f5.6 in broad daylight. In the shade, I use 1/250th at f4. In cloudy and golden hour, I use 1/500th of a second at f5.6. All right, so right now, like I'm in the shade, so I'm gonna be at 2/50th of a shutter, f5.6 because I'm shooting ISO 800 film. But I typically don't want to photograph anything with this type of shutter speed, because if I'm moving and if anything else is moving, it's probably going to be blurry. So when I'm in the shade, I feel like I'm just like kind of dead in the water, even though I can if I really try to. So always try to be in the sunlight, which is about to come right now, because now I can shoot at 1/1000th of a shutter speed at f8, and that's my bread and butter. I can get a lot of things in focus, and I have a really fast shutter speed. Sunlight is my best friend in street photography, and shade to me is dead. It could be different for you if you're a much slower walker or a much slower photographer. Like some people move at different paces, and for me, I like to move very fast. It can work against me, it can work with me. It's all on you, it's all on you. If you couldn't tell already, all the settings that I use prioritize the fastest shutter speed as possible because I'm going to be moving, the subject is as well, and I want to make sure that everything is nice tack sharp and not blurry because of motion. But at the same time, I do have to balance with a smaller aperture for a deeper depth of field. Again, full explanation in this video over here. And having a high ISO film like Portra 100 or Lomography 800 is going to allow me to have those settings that I need to make those great photos. But if you're one of those street photographers that love to shoot wide open at f1.4 or f2, I don't know what to tell you. The first question is from Film Era Renaissance. How often do people get offended when you just take a picture of them? I've only ever had 3 encounters, and one of them was classified as pretty confrontational. They threatened to call the police on me and, you know, was trying to block me from walking on the sidewalk, and they even took out their phone to record me, and I had to just politely say that I'm sorry, but this is just an art form and I was doing it for a school project, and that she couldn't legally detain me on the sidewalk, so I just kept walking while she was calling the police. It was a little bit awkward, but I just kept on walking. Next one is from Billy Pracoso. Cinebloom for street photography. I typically don't want to use any Cinebloom or Pro Mist filter when I'm doing street photography because I feel like that type of halation coming off of like highlights or maybe the skin might be too distracting and doesn't really look timeless, in my opinion. Kind of looks gimmicky. I know some people do like to use it when they're using it for, I guess, night street photography for the neon signs to look a bit more bloomy, but that's a preference thing, but I don't do it. The next one is from CDR STY, 50mm versus 35. I typically shoot 35mm in a space where it's a little bit more spaced out and people aren't that crowded around me. And 50mm is quite hard to do zone focusing in because it's so punched in and the depth of field is so shallow. I have no idea how the greats back then did it, but 50mm was usually their weapon of choice. This is from my buddy Wei from the Bay Area. Shout out to Wei. How do I make a stranger at ease with me photographing them? I think it's really hard if you don't want to get their attention. My goal in making my street photos is to not get their attention or to not ever like kind of break that barrier and ask them for the photo. If you want to, you could always be polite. Just ask them if they want to take a photo, and the worst they could say is no. But honestly, just try to have your camera near your face. I feel like the whole motion of bringing your camera up to your face draws a lot of attention and people react pretty quickly to that. So try to have your camera around your face at all times and try not to look suspicious as much as you can. This question is from my buddy Raphael. Shout out to Raph. What's your favorite zone to work with, close up or farther away? I want to get up close as much as possible, so 4 to 5 feet away is my favorite zone, so to speak, to work with. And I know a lot of people will not be comfortable with that when they start out because 4 to 5 feet away from a person that you don't even know is quite close. But if I do have permission, 2 to 3 feet, that is going to be the way that I'm going to make these photos a lot more intimate and a lot more impactful. This is a funny question from Onomiar Film. What do you do if someone asks you to delete their photo and you're shooting film? I've actually had one confrontation where somebody did do that, and I showed them the back of the camera and I tapped it. I'm like, sorry buddy, I can't delete it, but I promise I won't post it anywhere. And he was like, okay, thank you. I ended up posting it anyways. This is a good question from Sang 10.7. Is street photography too intrusive to others' privacy? There is a fine line and boundary that you shouldn't cross, which is like, you know, stepping into someone's property and photographing them through their window or something, or getting up in their grill when they're having a meal with a group of people. I don't think you should ever do that. But there is this famous street photographer named Bruce Gilden. That dude got up in people's grill with a flash. He's a really gigantic person, so it's hard to confront and fight that guy. But for someone of my stature and size, people will be more inclined to fight me if I do invade their space. It's all up to you. Use common sense. I think that sometimes when you are trying to make great art, though, you kind of do have to cross a little bit of boundaries. But if that's not you, then don't do that. And if it is you, you know, just try to be self-aware that sometimes people will feel like they have the right to retaliate. Best camera bag. So I like to travel very minimally, so I just carry a fanny pack that has like maybe 3 to 5 rolls of film and a flash and my keys, wallet, phone, all that jazz. But I do use a Peak Design Sling 5 liter, and that can carry 2 cameras, film, and all the other necessary EDC stuff. I highly recommend that bag. I'm pretty sure it's actually out of stock now because they made other versions of the bag, like a 3-liter and a 6-liter, I think. So yeah, slings are pretty cool, but you know, experiment as you like. Try to find something that doesn't like bump into your butt or your hip, or just like kind of swings into your body as you're walking around. It gets pretty annoying if it does that. This is a good question from Alyssa. Does it ever give you social anxiety? Thank you for loving my content, by the way. Yes, I do have anxiety when I do street photography. I'm no pro, I'm no legend, I'm still a rookie just trying to figure things out, and I've got very fortunate on getting some great shots, but I still get anxiety when I'm approaching somebody that I really want to photograph and they lock eyes with me from 10 feet out. I'm like, damn it, they found me, and then I kind of have to like make some kind of maneuver to shake their attention like some kind of video game. But I do still get social anxiety, and if I don't practice it enough on a consistent basis, that anxiety keeps increasing, and it's all about like management and just feeling it out. If you want to learn how to use flash in street photography without getting punched in the face or being confronted by a stranger, you're gonna have to subscribe down below because I'm still working on that, and it's going to be a great video. All right, guys, that's all I have for today's video. Make sure you subscribe and like down below and leave a comment so that this video can blow up and people can learn how to use film for street photography. And I will see you in that next video. Peace.